In this video, we are turning to one of Plato's most vivid and unsettling dialogues, Gorgias. It begins as a conversation between Socrates and the famous sophist Gorgias, but it soon becomes something much bigger, a confrontation between two opposing ways of life, between philosophy and rhetoric, between truth and persuasion, and between self-discipline and indulgence. Socrates challenges Gorgias and later his students Polus and Callicles on the true nature of oratory, the art of persuasive speech. Gorgias proudly describes rhetoric as the power to convince anyone of anything. But Socrates presses him. If rhetoric can be used for good or evil alike, can it really be called an art? Is it not more like a knack, a skill for pleasing people rather than revealing truth? Socrates makes a famous comparison here. Oratory is to justice what cookery is to medicine. Cookery produces pleasant tastes but ignores what is healthy. Rhetoric produces pleasing arguments but ignores what is true. True arts, like medicine or philosophy, aim at what is good for the soul. False arts, like flattery or cosmetics, aim only at pleasure. This contrast between the true and the false art raises an important question. What is the difference between oratory and genuine conversation? For Socrates, conversation is a joint search for truth, where both sides are willing to be corrected. Oratory, by contrast, is manipulation, a means of getting others to agree with you, whether or not you are right. So when Gorgias boasts of being able to use his skills for any purpose, Socrates asks whether an orator should use rhetoric without moral constraint. Can a teacher of persuasion wash his hands of how his students use their skill? Gorgias admits there are right and wrong ways to use rhetoric, and in doing so he concedes that moral truth must exist after all. Polus, Gorgias' pupil, takes over next. For him, rhetoric and power are about freedom, the ability to do whatever one desires. But Socrates argues that this is not freedom at all. The tyrant who obeys every desire is actually a slave to those desires. True power lies not in satisfying our impulses, but in controlling them through self-discipline. In this sense, power is not the ability to do whatever one wants, but the ability to do only what one ought. At this point, the dialogue takes a darker turn. Socrates declares one of his most shocking paradoxes. Doing wrong is worse than suffering wrong. Polus laughs. Surely that is absurd. If I am robbed or beaten, I suffer harm. If I commit the robbery, I gain from it. But Socrates insists that wrongdoing harms the soul, and harm to the soul is far worse than harm to the body. The wrongdoer, he says, is truly miserable, and more miserable still if he escapes punishment. Punishment, however painful, purifies the soul by restoring balance and justice. Here we might pause and ask ourselves, what does Socrates mean when he calls punishment good? Does he mean good as in useful, good as in morally right, or good for the person being punished? And can a society's idea of punishment ever really aim at the good of the wrongdoer rather than simple retribution? These questions lead directly into the deeper contrast that runs through the dialogue, between nature and convention, between what is natural and what is merely social custom. Callicles, the third interlocutor, argues that morality is nothing but convention, a set of rules invented by the weak to restrain the strong. By nature, he claims, the strong should rule and take whatever they please. Socrates turns this on its head. He argues that self-control is not weakness but strength. The person who masters his desires is freer than the one who obeys them. To Callicles, the good of life is a life of continual pleasure, like a jar that must constantly be filled because it is always leaking. To Socrates, the good life is one of order and self-sufficiency, a jar that can hold what is poured into it. The leaky jar image becomes one of the dialogue's most memorable symbols. So, we might ask, which of these pictures feels closer to real happiness? The constant pursuit of pleasure, or the peace of inner self-control? This leads us to the heart of Plato's question. Are pleasure and the good the same thing? Callicles insists that whatever is pleasant is good. Socrates shows the absurdity of this by pointing out that cowards and fools can enjoy as much pleasure as the wise and brave, which means pleasure and goodness cannot be identical. The good, for Socrates, is whatever truly benefits the soul, even if it causes pain at first. In this light, the difference between the philosopher and the sophist becomes clear. The sophist is like a charlatan who pretends to possess wisdom in order to gain power. The philosopher is like a physician of the soul, caring for its health rather than its immediate comfort. Socrates says that rhetoric, when used without truth, treats people as means to an end, manipulating them to serve one's desires. Philosophy, by contrast, treats people as ends in themselves, respecting their reason and autonomy. Behind all of this lies Plato's developing idea of truth. A statement, Socrates says, is true if it corresponds to the facts. Belief becomes knowledge only when it is both true and justified, when one can give an account or logos of why it is true. The Sophists, by teaching persuasion without concern for truth, collapse this distinction. But Socrates insists that moral truth, like factual truth, is real and objective, independent of our opinions about it. At the same time, Socrates is aware of human fallibility. He admits that he may be wrong, that his knowledge is limited. This humility, he says, is part of what separates philosophy from rhetoric. The orator claims to know everything. The philosopher knows that he does not. Yet Socrates still believes in moral expertise, the idea that there are people who understand moral truth better than others, just as doctors understand health better than their patients. Here we might ask, are there moral experts today? Should we treat philosophers, priests, or ethicists as experts in the way we treat doctors or scientists? Or are moral decisions ultimately too personal to outsource? By the end of the Gorgias, Socrates leaves his opponents speechless. He has overturned their assumptions about power, happiness, justice, and truth. Callicles still rejects him, but Plato's readers are meant to feel the force of Socrates' integrity. The dialogue closes with an image of cosmic justice. Those who live unjustly will eventually face the consequences in this world or the next. The just life, though harder, is ultimately the happier one. So, as we leave the Gorgias, Plato leaves us with questions that are as urgent now as they were in ancient Athens. When we speak, are we seeking truth or merely trying to win? When we pursue pleasure, are we cultivating our souls or corrupting them? And when we see wrongdoing in the world, do we believe, as Socrates did, that it is better to suffer injustice than to commit it? Plato's Gorgias does not give us easy answers, but it challenges us to choose which kind of life we want to lead: the life of the orator or the life of the philosopher.